I'm very happy and feel honored and privileged to introduce my young friend, Jalena, who I actually met when she was yay high, right? And just watched her grow and blossom. She has deep roots in the community here in Marin, although she lived in the East Bay, but her grandparents here were very active with the Asian American community. Her mother was head of youth and arts downtown San Rafael for the longest time. Her auntie Wendy is a well-known preschool teacher over there. I guess you call it in Greenbrae. So anyway, she just has and her uncle Marcus ran a very successful catering business. So anyway, she grew up with our Marin Chinese Cultural Association. She did lion dancing. She emceed a lot of our programs, including the Asian Pacific Heritage celebrations at the Bay Area Discovery Museum. And she went on to become a filmmaker and doing a lot of stuff around women and how strong and resilient women are. And her film company is all women, as far as I remember. And so she can share that with us. And I'm just gonna turn it over to Jalena, who can give us a little bit more background about the film that she's gonna show, as well as maybe a little bit more about herself and how she got into filmmaking. So take it away, Jalena.
Thank you so much. That was so sweet. I'm really honored and excited to be here tonight. As Auntie Sue said, my family has been very involved in this organization, and I grew up with the board meetings happening at my grandma's house and her cooking big pots of juk to feed everyone. So I have a lot of fond memories, essentially my entire childhood associated with MCCA and doing lion dance and everything like that. And I think being raised with such powerful women role models and a family that was so involved in organizing culturally and politically really shaped who I am. And my grandfather was also really involved in activism. He marched with Martin Luther King Jr. and with Cesar Chavez, and was very involved in radical movements. And so was my grandma. And so I was always raised with this idea of injustice exists in this world, and that part of our purpose is to kind of right those injustices and do what we can to stand for the things that we believe in. And my mom also raised me around a lot of different women leaders, just knowledge of different movements that were going on and different women that were making impacts around the world. And then when I left my Bay Area bubble and went to college on the East Coast, I realized that the experience that I had growing up was pretty unique, and that there's a lot of people who aren't exposed to that kind of community-based cultural setting and aren't exposed to parents that are involved in these kind of issues. And especially in the Asian community and Asian American community, I realized that a lot of my friends and peers had a really different relationship with their parents and their grandparents, and wouldn't be able to talk with them as easily about social issues or social justice issues. So I realized how fortunate I was, and what a unique perspective it is. And also that it feels like a gap that was something missing, that these stories about powerful women weren't as easy to access if you don't have a parent who's telling you these stories just orally or giving you this information. It's not that easy to seek it out for yourself. So that's where I see film coming in as a really powerful medium, because film allows for something that can be a really intimate moment to reach a lot more people. So one of the hopes that I have with my work is to explore intergenerational trauma and healing, and also complicate and give depth to women leaders, especially Asian American Pacific Islander women leaders. So that brings me to this project and this film that I'm going to share tonight, which is called Standing Above the Clouds. And it follows Native Hawaiian mother-daughter activists that are standing to protect their sacred mountain, Mauna Kea, who is right behind me, from the building of the world's largest telescope. And I started this project. Auntie Sue did such a great job of my family breakdown. And I have one other auntie who lives on the Big Island, and she lives where this mountain is and where this movement takes place. And in 2015, the protectors of Mauna Kea faced off against the police and faced arrest on the mountain, defending the mountain from construction. And my auntie sent me, as aunties do, all these articles about it, all these different news clips, and I started looking at them and I saw these videos of Auntie Pua, who you'll see in the film, just speaking with so much conviction and strength. And her daughter would always be right by her side. And that really caught my attention of just seeing that really powerful image of a leader with her daughter right by her. And that was enough to spark my interest to be like, okay, I really want to come out and see if I can, talk with them, if we could make a film about mother-daughter activism. And I think because of my relationship with my mom, I know that it's so beautiful to share like a life's work or life passion with your mom, and so empowering. But there's also times where it can be challenging, because when you have overlapping relationships with someone, sometimes you just want your mom, or you just want more caregiving, but they're kind of more focused on like strategy or career stuff. So I could relate to that feeling, and that was something I was really interested in exploring, and something I felt like wasn't really talked about or covered in a lot of movies that already exist. So that's why I wanted to start this project. And I went there, and in documentary filmmaking, it's really important who is the person that is introducing you to the people that you want to talk to, like who's going to co-sign for you, who's going to be your ambassador. So for me, my auntie who lives on the Big Island, she has worked in the Pacific for a really, really long time. And she worked in the Marshall Islands, working with deaf-blind kids who were impacted by the atomic testing that was happening there. And so one of her longtime friends who she met there, who had watched me grow up my whole life, also lives on the Big Island and happens to be distant cousins with Auntie Pua, who's the main character of my film. So he was the one that first introduced me, and luckily she said yes. And that is how all of this came to be. So I'm gonna start to play the film now, if that's okay with everyone. Okay, cool. So I'll play it now, and then please let me know what questions you have, and I'm excited to discuss afterwards.
Mauna Kea is the highest mountain in the world from the seafloor, so the summit stands above the clouds. Its base is anchored deep in the ocean. So when we stand there, we know that we are touching all things on the earth, and we know that that is sacred. So if you have a place like that, that is your Mauna Kea. And then I say, what would you do for that place if it were threatened? I am one of many of Mauna Kea Ohana. That means family to Mauna Kea. And I'm also a petitioner in both contested case hearings that were held on this island for the protection and the love of the Mauna, to stop the development of a 30-meter telescope, an 18-story telescope on the northern plateau of our sacred mountain.
The Mauna is a portal, and it's like the closest we can get to our Akua and our creator. When we dance hula, we dance about the Mauna, and our prayers and our chants and it just goes right up to them through that portal.
Mauna Kea is our watershed. Literally holds the water for this island, protects us from every single storm that comes our way. All of our aquifers on this side of the island is fed by this mountain. The Mauna calls in the rain and the snow, and that pure water form trickles down into all of our waterways. How could we not stand for this?
I remember feeling that sadness when I first had gone up there, because I wasn't even aware that there was that many telescopes. And then when you're finally up there and you see for yourself and you can count them, and it's more than two hands, it's painful.
There's already 13 up on the summit. But this time, it was going to be the one too many, the one too big.
The TMT will be a much larger and more extensive facility than any observatory that's come before it. The telescope calls for a structure that's 18 stories high, twice the size of any other building allowed on the island. All that on top of a structure built to support the dome that is larger than a football field.
We went up, and this is our first stand, and especially with this generation, this is our first time. And so we had to really call upon the chants that they've taught us.
This is not your place. And this is our Piko, our Genesis Moku. This is where we come from. I know you guys would protect your land with everything that you have. So respect us.
That was my life from then. I mean, October 7th happened, and even though I kind of understood what it was they were standing for, and I knew that it was not okay, once my feet touched the Mauna on that day, everything changed.
They thought they were building a telescope. Instead, they awoke a nation. These are some pictures that I used in my testimony. This was Tali. She was 9, 2013, and she wrote on the bottom, and I read them in my testimony. I love Mauna Kea like I love my mama. My position in the case is the emotional trauma to our people that are suffering and that are going through this emotional stress.
After the first arrest, there was like weeks, I would say months, that I didn't want to leave the house. I didn't want to be around people. It was just kind of like on edge. And then finally I started coming around again, and then it happened again.
58 arrests on Mauna Kea in 2015. 7 of those arrests were Native Hawaiian women in a prayer circle. Mother and daughter, side by side, arrested for being in ceremony. I am a Native Hawaiian, a mother, a breakfast waitress. I have no legal background and no experience in the legal system. And I am standing here among some of the highest paid lawyers in all of Hawaii. Why am I here? Why do I need to be here to convince you to do your job?
O na ala a papa, kula lani, ala I luna, e ala oi.
Just standing with your family members, your daughters, your mothers, there's always an element of fear. You know them at home. You know what makes them cry, what makes them angry. You know how fragile they are, as well as how strong they are. And then you're on a front line with that. are heading up a mountain with your children without being even voiced. You are thinking, how am I going to stand? And at the same time, how am I going to protect my very continuance of myself, which for us are our daughters, who we cherish beyond all things, and trust that we're going to be okay at the end of the day.
What we were doing, it's something that will be taught in, their history books one day. And for our children to be a part of it, it's something that we should all be proud of.
This work is not easy. It is hard, and it is heart-wrenching sometimes. And sometimes I don't want to do it anymore because of the amount of emotion and just some of the things that we see in this time. It is so overwhelming.
They cannot be doing that to our grandparents and my brothers and sisters. We're not the criminals.
Oh, that is better. I think about my daughter who's 16 and my unborn daughter right now that are feeling this. It's such an incredible feeling to know that they're a part of it. We got to start training our Wahine warriors from the womb.
What's in it?
Which one? Raisins, probably.
Our moments in the van are like our closest moments we've had in like a while, because I don't see her a lot during the day because she's doing 1,000 things because she's poor case. But yeah, it's like our little sanctuary in here, our few like rest moments where we can just hide from all the things going on outside here.
When you're having to make plans with your own children on what happens if the police come, what are we going to do? Like, I found the first time I ever said to Kapule, if we're separated, just get in the van and lock the door and just hide down and don't ever come out. Or if your sister or I are arrested, just keep filming. That's extremely difficult to even discuss, much less imagine having to do. I just want to remind us all that what law is it today?
1600.
1600 days from the collective stance, our first stance from 2014 on. Today we made 1600 days holding the Mauna in our hearts and in our hands.
We will be here. Whether you come today, whether you come tomorrow, whether you come next week or next year, whenever it is, as long as our Mauna is instructed with desecration through the building of the 30-meter telescope, we will be here.
When I see my girls holding their own, standing in a line, working with others and calming them down and following in my footsteps, I'm extremely proud of them. And I think, would I leave them somewhere else and face this by myself? I could never do that.
No matter what, win or lose, the Mauna won. There was a nation that was awakened. I mean, just for myself, I wouldn't be doing the things that I do today had it not been for the Mauna.
The guardians of that mountain are women. When the women come together, and call upon these women guides to hear us.
You know, when I look at the women in my life, I am in awe by just how incredible they are. When we're standing together, there is the 40, the 400, the 40,000, the 400,000 women behind and around us. Women of all colors, of all ages, on this mountain that we love so deeply.
Enchantress of the ocean womb, daughter to the transcendent, dancer of...
Thank you. Thank you for watching. I'll just say briefly that so that was our short film, 15 minutes, and we wanted to create that so that while the movement was kind of at its height in 2019, there would be something that could spread awareness about the movement and about the women in the film. And it was screened at a bunch of different festivals and a bunch of different schools and at educational conferences and stuff like that. So we're really, really happy about that. And we kind of stopped filming for that project in 2019 when they were still living on the frontline camp to physically block construction from going up the mountain. And we've continued filming since then to create a feature-length documentary, which is about 90 minutes, so a full-length one. And that has been such a beautiful process. And we wanted to be able to have the space to really show the intricacies of each relationship and how that plays out and what that means, as well as, you know, I feel like in this, we pack a lot of information in there and you get to know people, but you don't really get to know their full personalities, how funny they are, and just, you know, stuff that having more time can allow for. So we're really excited to be working on that. We're in post-production right now and we're on track to premiere at some point next year. So that's really exciting. And initially I had envisioned that project as being focused on a lot of travel and be about the kind of relationships that Auntie Pua and her daughters have built and alliances that they've built with Indigenous communities across the world and how important and impactful that work is for the work that they do on the Mauna. And it's funny because at the start of 2020, I rang in the new year on the Mauna with Auntie Pua and with her family. And it was like January 1st, 2020, and we were going over our plans for the year. And we were like, wow, it's going to be such a year of travel for us. Like, we're going to be going to all these places. And obviously, we know that didn't happen. But what ended up happening was, I think, far more interesting story emerged instead. And that was that in the, you know, forced stillness of COVID, a lot of health issues came up for Auntie Pua. And that was really challenging because she's always been, you know, the fiercest, strongest, like will outlast you on the dance floor type of person, and then be up tomorrow to orchestrate rallies and protests and just always, you know, really a pillar, as she would say. And So when she faced the health challenges, that was really hard. And now our film kind of chronicles that struggle and that journey, and her daughters stepping into their positions of leadership during that time, as well as exploring intergenerational healing and how part of that means passing down a way of doing things to your children or to your daughters that goes a little bit easier on you and on your own health and your own well-being. So that's something that we're thinking about a lot now, which I think maybe collectively we're thinking about that with COVID and with everything we've been through the past few years. But I think it really exposed the lack of care systems that are existing in our society presently, and how activism and doing this kind of radical work and thinking about what our future could look like and what things could be like, and kind of bringing that into our daily lives can really create some of that care that our general system is lacking. Does anyone have any questions?
I had a question about, it's still going on then, and how did COVID impact the demonstrations?
A great question. Thank you for asking that. So COVID took away the immediate threat of construction. So in 2019, they had planned to start construction. They weren't able to do that. And then there was a frontline camp for 9 months at the base of the mountain to block that construction. And then in March of 2020, when everything kind of shut down due to COVID, there was not really much of a threat that construction vehicles would be able to go up, because in that time, it was lockdown, everyone's going home, no one's working. So the protectors also went home from the frontline camp, just in the interest of public health, and because everyone had kuleana or responsibilities to take care of back with their families and at home. So it stopped in that way, but they've continued to work to protect the mountain in the legal system and in the legislation. So there's been some different laws that have come up over the past few years about who has jurisdiction over the mountain and what kind of management laws are put into place and who is the management board, and a lot of things like that. So they're still very much active and working on protecting the mountain. And the plans to build a telescope are still also very much active. And the side that wants the telescope still plans on starting soon. So we think it could be in the next year or so that they make an attempt again, although no one can say for sure. But in the telescope's outreach information and newsletters, they talk about how they're working on building all the pieces, and they still plan as of now to build there. Yeah.
So who is the owner of the land? Is it federal or is it the tribal people?
It's actually the university. So the University of Hawaii owns it, and they lease it to, there's all the telescopes that are currently on there, which you saw in the film, that are a lot smaller, and they pay $1 a year for rent. So that's another big point of contention. Yeah. And from our perspective with the film, with the project, we see it as a victory that they've been able to keep the mountain safe from the construction of the telescope for this long. If they had never stopped it, it would be built today. So that's such a really powerful impact that the mountain can still look like this, how it does here, and it's not it doesn't have like a big structure right here. And I think it just shows the power of these women, and also this kind of activism, that it can have such a big impact like that. And when we think about our communities and the things that were built that are now maybe poisoning our water or impacting our soil, like all the lead issues in the East Bay, and all of these different things, like so much of it would be easier if we had been able to and organized enough to stop it before it was built. And now since it was built, we have to deal with all of the ramifications that maybe people didn't know before, or maybe they did know and didn't really care.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for asking that. And the Instagram Protect Mauna Kea, they have a lot of the updates on the movement and they post about if there's certain call to actions around like signing a petition or submitting testimony or something like that. And a recent legal update is that after years, all of the kapuna, or all of the elders who were arrested, all of those arrests have been dropped. So that was a really great thing that happened recently.
I think Danielle had something to say. So did you have a question, Danielle? Yeah.
I too was wondering if the protectors having to physically block construction was ongoing. So that got answered.
Okay.
But the fight goes on.
Yes, the fight goes on. And that's something that we explore in the longer film too, of something that Auntie Pua says is that if she had a choice between physically blocking and being there with all those people in person versus dealing with more like personal traumas or struggles or PTSD from the front line, like at home and in isolation, like it was in COVID, that like she would choose to be on the Mauna, you know, at any point easily. So that was something that really struck me too, which I think probably a lot of us can relate to. But yeah, just wanting to prioritize that, you know, those more internal or maybe less seen things that we all, you know, hold on to are so important to heal, and just as important and necessary to prepare to show up in those movements in those ways as other preparation, like having the right clothes, the right food, but kind of seeing it as, you know, just as important as that.
So Jalena, I have a question. Since the land is owned by the University of Hawaii, does it make sense to put pressure on them to stop this construction? What sort of deal do they have with the government? Because who's building these telescopes? Is the federal government, right? Or is that a private? I wasn't sure.
So the telescope, it's a coalition of 6 countries, and our country is obviously one of them, and it's the UC system actually that is funding it. So the UC system is one place that pressure has been applied to, like at the UC Board of Regents meetings or the different UC. I'm not extremely familiar with like all the inner workings of how the UC system works, but I know that Board of Regents meetings have been something that have been targeted to like bring up these issues of pressuring them to pull out their support from the telescope. Canada is another country, India, China, Japan, and the UK, and then our country. So that's the 6. And the University of Hawaii, it does make sense to pressure them. And there has been, I think, a lot of different talk. There is like a part of the university that's very aligned with the protectors and like the, you know, the Hawaiian Studies department and those kind of professors. And then there's like a side that's not so aligned. And I think it's a pretty significant, like there's pretty significant financial incentive for the university because they would get to rent out that telescope time. And it is a $3.4 billion project to build the telescope. So a lot of the people in power, like the governor and others, they have that financial incentive to build, unfortunately.
I was just reading Wikipedia. It looks like this project is being funded by approximately 11 countries. And I know the desire to protect the land, the mountain. But on the other side, the observatory, I don't know much about this observatory, but I gathered that this is something that can benefit mankind in the future. And that is probably, or most likely, the reason why approximately 11 countries are funding this project. So I guess you look at the pros and cons of this, protecting the land versus what we can find out to benefit mankind in the future.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. Oh, sorry, there's an echo. There's already 13 telescopes on the mountain, and so there is a lot going on to through those to observe space and the heavens and everything that's out there. And I think the issue with this telescope in particular is just the scale. It's so huge. It's like multiple football fields. It's 18 stories. Everything else on the island has a 7-story building limit. So this is over double that on the highest and most sacred peak. So it's just a massive scale and would have to, dig into the mountain in order to do all of the design elements that are needed. So I think that's the main concern. And then also that I think it was Einstein who said that you can't solve a problem with the same level of consciousness that created it. And I think this kind of ideology of like we constantly need things to be bigger and better and bigger and bigger has created a lot of our current issues, especially environmentally. So that, that kind of thinking might not help continuing on. And if the goal is to be able to, see life on other planets or, other things like that, there are already existing telescopes that are in space already that could be able to access similar vantage points that wouldn't sacrifice such sacred land. Do you have a question, Heather?
Yeah, I was just thinking, where does it end? And yes, this might be for the future, but where does it end? We keep on, and then I was just relating it to here, Mount Tamalpais. Can you just imagine? I jotted down when you said that 18 stories high. I'm just trying to imagine that, just 18 stories high and larger than a football field, and then seeing it in my mind, putting on Mount Tam, because that's close to us. And how would we all feel about that? I bet you it wouldn't happen, right? And I think it depends where, and with different countries. I also feel there's probably, like with a lot of things, a military aspect, behind all this. There's all that too, which carries a lot of power, because out of fear. And it's just all so crazy. And you say there's all those already digging into your water. And when you explain about how you just explain it so beautifully, what your mountain represents, and it's holy, which is everything, right? And the water, how keep building, keep digging in, then it's going to mess up the water, and water is a huge issue for Hawaii anyway. So you're going to lose Hawaii. I mean, so unfair. I'm amazed. I have not heard of this before. I'm just seeing you all there, and the elders that really punched in me. They're lifting the elder, but they were lifting them gently, because aren't these Hawaiian police who had to do that because they're being made to, because their police are there? Like a civil war or something. I don't know. It's just like they're taking, and they were trying to be gentle with them, but they didn't want to, but they had to. And I'm thinking, if everyone resisted enough, they'd resisted the police, that wouldn't have happened, right? They wouldn't be, no, we're not going to pick up those. But we're also constrained, aren't we, by so many things in our lives.
Yeah, I thought it was really sad. They had to put those, what do you call those, white plastic tags? I mean,
yes.
like
zip ties. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah, those ties. But so Jalena, whether it's 6 countries or 11 countries all involved in this, I know that your film has been shown in different places, but have they gotten to Canada or India or China or some of these other countries to raise the awareness? Like Heather said, she didn't know about this, and Hawaii is part of the United States, but I doubt that a lot of Americans are aware of what's going on, across the Pacific Ocean. So could you comment about that, and whether there is some more global kind of awareness and what might be happening in these other countries?
Yeah. When they were on the frontline camp, there was, and thank you so much, Heather, for those comments and the comparison to Mount Tam. That is so apt. And thank you so much for sharing everything that you did. Thank you. And it reminds me too, one outreach effort, a big one has been to Japan, and to equate, this for a Japanese audience to Mount Fuji. And like, you would never let something like this be built on Mount Fuji. And to be like, please extend that same respect to this mountain that we revere in the same way that you revere yours. So there has been a lot of outreach efforts there. And in 2019, when they were living on the base of the mountain at the frontline camp, there was anywhere from 20 to 7,000 people that came. So on the big days when there were 7,000 people came from all over the world to show support, from all across Europe, from many of the countries that are contributors to the telescope. And a lot of people came and apologized and said, like, I'm so sorry that my country is doing this, and we're trying to, pressure them to pull their funding. But as we all know, we can't control everything that our country does or supports. And a lot of times that can be really hard and challenging, but it was so beautiful to see on the people level how many people who did know about it support it. And that's something that we hope for the film, for both this one and our longer one, that we can raise some awareness, because I think sometimes when you're working really hard on an issue, or when you're really involved in the movement, you kind of forget that there's a whole world out there that doesn't know about it. So I think that kind of like outreach piece and the storytelling piece is so important. And that's where film can also really come in handy. And a lot of the stuff that you're speaking to as well, Heather, of just how beautifully they talk about the mountain and what it means to them, and that spiritual relationship and how holy it is. That's a really important part of my filmmaking practice, is to make sure that people, especially women or femme people, have the space to talk about the things that they're passionate about and the things that they love, because so often in our world we don't get to see that, and we don't get exposed to that. And especially in documentaries, the people that we see interviewed, the people that we hear from, it's shaping our understanding of what it means to be an expert, or what it looks like to be an expert, or what it sounds like. So it's really important to me to make sure that there are voices that are highlighted in that light that might not always be in like a more traditional media space. And one of the women who there was a whole media section on the Mauna. It was a bunch of different filmmakers and artists that were all there to help film and make social media graphics and just cover and contribute to the movement any way that we could. But there is this woman, she's a professor, her name is Dr. Ilima Long, and she's a Hawaiian professor. And she put forth this kind of framework for the activism, but then also the storytelling around it, and talked about physical intervention and narrative intervention. And physical intervention being, what we've talked about, like that physically blocking the construction trucks and physically saying like, no, you can't go any further. And then that narrative intervention is in the storytelling and in how that moment is talked about, how it's told, how it's covered in the press, how we're going to talk about it through film and through songs and through history books and all these things that will last for further on, and how important it is to have that narrative intervention with that physical intervention in order to get the change that you want. Because that storytelling piece is what can really change people's minds about if they're in support of it or not, based on how they're hearing about it and whose eyes they're hearing about it through.
Are you aware if there have been any environmental studies done as a result of what they are trying to build, which is football field 18 stories high? And the reason why I asked that is because of what happened to Buck Center in Marin County. I don't know if there are people living below the mountain, but the Buck Center, there are condominiums below Buck Center. And this had happened like maybe 15 years ago, where because of the weight of the building, it destabilized the entire mountain, and the people that are living the houses, the condos, townhomes, they end up with cracks in their driveway, and many of those suffered. I don't, and after that, the news just died down after a while. But they have concluded that is because of the construction of the Buck Center, which is a huge building on top of the mountain here in Marin County.
Wow, thank you for sharing that. I hadn't heard about that, but yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. There have been some environmental studies. I don't want to speak too much to it because I don't know all of the particulars, but I think there might be opposing environmental studies or maybe some contention around it. And the alternate location for the telescope was the Canary Islands. So there was talk as well in 2019 with the Frontland stand of like, oh, why don't we just, move to the alternate location? Like, let's do the Canary Islands, which are currently a colony of Spain. And so there was some focus on that, like, okay, let's do Canary Islands. And then at first, I believe the kind of government officials there said, okay. And then their environmentalists took a bit of a deeper look into it and they ended up saying, no, you can't have it here. So the alternate location ended up pulling out. So I'm sure there must be something going on with that environmental impact report. But that's a really good thing to bring up about the cracking driveways. And that's so, I'm so sorry to hear about that.
So Jalena, are there villages or towns below the Mauna Kea where the residents of there would be impacted? Because I'm just thinking such a huge project, right? Just the construction alone, right? The thousands and thousands of vehicles that need to bring all this stuff to the top of the mountain, every day in and out for years, right? So what's the inhabitants like in the area?
It's a lava field. So there, prior to the most recent stand, to my knowledge, there wasn't really anyone living there. There aren't really like homes. I think originally people aren't really even supposed to go to the Mauna at all because it's that sacred. It's like the kind of place that I believe only like nobility went to back in the old days. And even more recently, like it would be, for a really special occasion, or if you're really in need of something like spiritually, then maybe you would take a journey up there, but it wouldn't really be, something casual. And the mountain, it's mentioned in the film, but it's 14,000 feet, which is very, very high. And even at the base of the mountain, it's 7,000 feet elevation. So the short answer is no, there isn't a bunch of homes down there, but that's kind of part of the sacredness that people wouldn't necessarily live there or inhabit the mountain.
What about the people who are using those 13 telescopes now? Are people there working full time? Do they commute back and forth, or do they live a couple of days at a time because a telescope, I'm thinking they're trying to record day and night movements or whatever.
They do have some like barracks. They have like a visitor center, and they have some housing built for the people that work there. So yeah, they do work there, but it's kind of more like temporary, like portables type housing than like something with a foundation. And that makes me think too of, Heather, what you brought up with the military. That is a very relevant factor to bring up in this case, and as with many things that a lot of money are put into. And the largest U.S. military base, called Pohakuloa, is right down the street from the mountain. And they do active bomb training there every summer. So there is a lot of really painful things that are happening to the land right around there as well. Does anyone else have any questions? Let's see, I know we're almost at time. I just wanted to say again, thank you. Oh, sorry, Nancy, did you have a question or something?
I just want to know, you're saying your film is in post-production. So when do you have a release date, or do you know when we might be able to see it?
We don't have a release date yet, but it's in post-production and we're on track to finish by the end of the year. So it's kind of a long road with these projects, but when we do have secure our premiere and have our release date, I'll definitely let you all know. And we're really excited to share that. Yeah. And thank you so much for having me. It means so much to get to be with you all. And I'm so glad that we got to do this virtually. And I feel like my grandma is smiling from wherever she is now seeing this.
Well, Jalena, I hope that the 90-minute documentary that you're, in post-production will be shown here in Marin. Like I believe Standing Above the Clouds, you had sort of it premiered or debut at Raphael Theater. I kind of remember
oh yeah
attending that. So that would be really nice because you are such a local filmmaker with just ties all over. So that would be really great.
Yeah, that would be great. I would love that.
Yeah, maybe the Raphael Theater will bring you back. It's like, okay,
Yeah.
here's the sequel of it.
Yeah, I was like, maybe this time next year, we'll see.
Yeah, or you can enter in the Mill Valley Film Festival.
Oh yeah, true. I'll add that to our calendar. And we were really grateful that we just participated in this something through the Centerville Theater. They're like a part of the California Film Institute, and they just had a film festival this past like last week or something, and we were part of their pitch program. They select like 5 documentaries that can pitch about their project, which is also virtual, which is really nice. And we got to participate in that, and there was audience voting, and you win like cash prize if you get the most votes. And we did not get the most votes, but we did get a jury prize from some of the like industry jury that they had. So we were really happy about that, and that gave us the funds that we need to continue with our edit.
And also, didn't you say this the short piece is going to be shown? Was it PBS or something coming up?
Yeah, it actually was already on PBS, but it's available to watch online through POV. And yeah, it had a national broadcast for Mother's Day in 2021. Yeah.
Good.
So for those who missed it or missed some of the discussion that we had earlier with Jalena, this is being recorded, and when it gets edited or whatever, it will be posted on our Triple AM website,
aamarin.org.
Yeah, so you can catch up on it. But even if you Google Standing Above the Clouds, I believe you can just stream it or whatever. So that's available for you to watch again. It is a short piece. So after all this discussion, you might watch it with a kind of a different perspective to kind of get, and maybe put yourselves in the positions of these women, the elders, the mother, the younger. I mean, it was really a cross-generational, intergenerational movement. And I don't know that much about the Hawaiian culture, but it was like this was a movement that the women took on versus the men. And maybe just a brief comment about that, Jalena?
Well, I think there was both people, there's all genders that were helping the movement. And I think that's part of like that lens of storytelling, that's just this one story, but there's so many stories about the movement and about the people that are working to protect the mountain. So there are many men that are also working to protect the mountain, but these are some of the women that have dedicated their lives and their daughters' lives too. And I have to head out, but thank you so much again for having me and for being here and watching the film. It was so great to share space with all of you, and thank you so much for coming.